The year is 1882, and the adventure is about to begin. This story involves over 3,000 head of cattle, two very different states in one heck of a journey. This is the story of the Great Cattle Drive of 1882. There are many journeys that have happened in the United States of America. Many people travel across the country to see friends or family, or just for fun. And sometimes those journeys involve thousands of cows. That's right. This is the story of one cattle drive that may be more than any other. The year is 1882, and this journey will take years. It will take thousands of workers, and it will take over 3,000 head of cattle. Let's get started. In the early days of the United States, there were only two ways to get cows from Texas to Montana. You could drive them north, or you could drive them east and then backtrack later, but that was an expensive venture. So most cattle hands drove their cattle north. This meant a long journey through dangerous territory with stampedes, rustlers, and harsh weather conditions. For months, the cowboys would travel with their cattle until they reached Montana, where they could sell their cattle for a profit. Sometimes the cattle drives took over a year to complete, which meant that the cowboys had to be prepared for anything. They had to carry enough food and supplies to last them for months on end. They also had to be able to defend themselves against rustlers and stampedes. One of the most famous cattle drives ever undertaken was the Drive of 1882, when a herd of over 3,105 cattle was driven from Texas to Montana. The drive was led by two men, Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving, who were two of the most experienced cattle hands of the time. The journey was fraught with danger, but the cowboys eventually made it to Montana with all but a few hundred head of cattle. Today, we're going to explore the epic journey of these 3,105 cattle, the cowboys who drove them, and the challenges they faced along the way. We'll also uncover some of the lesser-known details of this historic event, such as the impact it had on the development of the American West and the legacy it left behind. So sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to learn about the epic cattle drive of 1882. Let's start at the beginning. Why were so many cattle being driven north in 1882? Well, it's because the market for beef was booming in the eastern United States, and Texas cattlemen wanted to capitalize on this opportunity. The problem was that getting their cattle to market was no easy feat. In addition to the difficulties involved in transporting large herds of animals over long distances, there were also dangers around every corner, from stampedes to rustlers. But despite these challenges, cattle drives like this one continued to take place throughout the 1800s, connecting distant markets and transforming the American West forever. Goodnight and Loving had been driving cattle together since the 1860s, and they knew what it took to get a herd of cattle from point A to point B. They had driven cattle from Texas to Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, and they knew that the journey would be long and difficult. But they also knew that the profits could be huge. The price of beef was high in Montana, and they were confident that they could make a fortune if they could get their cattle there. So in the summer of 1882, they set out on what would become a legendary journey. Their herd consisted of over 3,105 cattle, mostly Texas steers, and they were accompanied by a crew of about 30 cowboys. The journey began in the rolling hills of Texas, and the cowboys quickly settled into a routine. They would drive the cattle for hours each day, stopping only for water and rest. The cattle were constantly on the move, and the cowboys had to be prepared for anything. But the journey was not just about driving cattle from one point to another. It was also about survival. The cowboys had to contend with stampedes, rustlers, and harsh weather conditions. At times, they were forced to abandon their wagons and drive the cattle on foot. There were times when the cowboys were injured or even killed, but they pressed on. They had to. The cattle were their livelihood, and they couldn't afford to lose any. The weeks went on, the terrain changed. The cowboys moved from the rolling hills of Texas to the rugged mountains of Montana. They crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and descended into valleys. All the while, the cattle were moving forward. The cowboys slept under the stars, cooked over open fires, and ate simple meals of beans, bacon, and bread. They were rough and rugged men, hardened by years of working in the cattle industry. They were skilled horsemen and cattle hands, and they knew how to work together to get the job done. As the journey continued, the cowboys began to encounter other travelers, some friendly and some not so much. They met Native American tribes who were curious about the white man's way of life. They also encountered other cowboys and cattle hands who were driving their own herds to market. Sometimes the cowboys would help each other out, but sometimes they would compete against each other for the best grazing land or the best water holes. Finally, after months on the road, the cowboys reached their destination. They had driven over 3,105 cattle from Texas to Montana. They were exhausted, but they were also exhilarated. They had survived the journey, and they had brought the cattle with them. The cattle drive of 1882 was a success. In the years that followed, Goodnight and Loving continued to drive cattle across the American West. They became some of the most successful cattle hands of all time. The cattle drive of 1882 was not just a cattle drive. It was a journey of adventure, survival, and triumph. It was a testament to the hard work, skill, and determination of the cowboys who undertook it. It was also a microcosm of the American West itself, a land of opportunity, danger, and adventure. We can learn a lot from the cowboys who undertook this epic journey. They were men who were not afraid of hard work or danger. They were men who valued freedom, independence, and the opportunity to make their own way in the world. They were also men who understood the importance of teamwork and perseverance. The cattle drive of 1882 was a team effort. It took the skills and cooperation of dozens of men to drive the cattle from Texas to Montana. The cowboys had to work together to manage the herd, care for the cattle, and protect them from danger. They also had to persevere through months of hardship and adversity. The journey was long and arduous, and there were times when the cowboys were tempted to give up. But they pressed on, knowing that their success depended on their ability to stick together and push through to the end. If you've ever driven cattle yourself, you know what it takes. It's a long, hard journey that requires patience, skill, and determination. But it's also an amazing experience that creates a sense of camaraderie and accomplishment like nothing else. Today, cattle drives like the one undertaken by Goodnight and Loving are rare. The advent of railroads and trucks has made it easier and more cost-effective to transport cattle to market. But that doesn't mean that the spirit of the cattle drive is gone. There are still plenty of cowboys out there who are keeping the tradition alive. If you ever get the chance to drive cattle yourself, I highly recommend it. It's an experience that you'll never forget. Thanks for watching. Remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Have you ever driven cattle? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.